Good morning, Blazers, and happy Thursday. Welcome to Lit Class. Please make sure you have your notebook out. Super grateful to be with all of you. Happy Thursday, but it's kind of like Friday because we don't have school tomorrow, Friday, and we don't have school on Monday. So we have a beautiful, awesome weekend, and I hope you guys have a great Labor Day and a lot of fun with your family. But let's buckle down and focus on Lit right now. And then after working hard, we will have earned a fabulous weekend. I'm so proud of you guys. So, first off, let's review. So, we've got the Incredibles. They are the main characters of the Incredibles movie. What do you call the main character of a story? The protagonist. Very good. And in fact, who would you say is the main protagonist? I'd say it's probably Mr. Incredible because we learn more about him than any other character. We learn about his backstory. And here we have Syndrome. Syndrome is the supervillain that goes against the Incredibles. What do we call the force that opposes the protagonist? That's the antagonist. Very good. Number 2. Here we have Cruella de Vil, the evil woman who is trying to, get the Dalmatian skin for her ugly clothing. She is evil, and she opposes all the Dalmatians. So what kind of a character would she be? We would call her the antagonist. Very good. And let's think about it. At the beginning of the story, she's evil. At the end of the story, she's evil. What do we call a character that stays the same? That would be a static character. Very good. So let's move on. So yesterday, I had you guys brainstorm the character, setting, and conflict of 3 different stories. You guys came up with some super cool ideas. Today, I want you to go to the next page in your notebook. For me, that's page 19. And I want you to write conflict. And you can even draw a Pac-Man and a ghost if you want. Because today, we're going to talk about conflict. Remember, conflict is the problem in a story. It's what our protagonist faces. Sometimes they face antagonists, but sometimes they face their own, themselves. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the different types of conflict. So we've got person versus person conflict, person versus self, that's them against themselves, and person versus society. All right, so what we're going to do, I'm going to have you take some notes first. So please copy down person versus person. This is our first type of conflict, and it's probably the most common conflict. It's when 2 characters struggle against each other. So why don't you go ahead and hit pause and copy down this definition in your notebook. So again, this is one of the most common conflicts in all, literature. It's when 2 characters are fighting it against each other, just like Pac-Man versus the Ghost. They're always struggling against each other. Another example would be David and Goliath, right? David is a little boy, and Goliath is this huge warlord. And David, and Goliath, they fight head to head. They're character versus character, mano a mano. You might think of Harry Potter versus Voldemort, or the Big Bad Wolf versus Little Red Riding Hood, or Luke versus Darth Vader. There are so many examples of this, right? We've got a good, a lot of times it's a good character versus a bad character, but not always, okay? But anywho, person versus person are 2 characters in conflict with one another, right? They have conflicting interests. Maybe one of them doesn't like the other one. So that one I think is pretty straightforward. In your notes, person versus person, did you copy down an example? You silly. Make sure you copy down examples, right? That's a great way to remember, what person versus person is. So I wrote down David and Goliath. And again, if I'm going too quick, hit pause and copy down the notes. Let's move on to our next type of conflict. Our next type of conflict is a person versus self. And again, this when a character is in conflict with themselves. This is an internal conflict. It's internal because it takes place inside of a character's mind. So it's internal because it's inside the character's mind. So go ahead and hit pause and make sure you copy that down into your notebook. So I want you to think about the kinds of problems, the kinds of conflicts that could take place in a character's mind. Well, think about this. What if a character, doesn't have a lot of confidence? Well, that could be a kind of internal conflict. Maybe, a character is kind of selfish. And they want to be better, right? They struggle inside themselves. They want to be a better person. So an internal conflict could look many ways, but one thing a character might struggle with in their mind is self-doubt, right? They might not be confident. They might have a moral dilemma, right? Again, this character doesn't know what to do, and so they're struggling in their mind. They're deciding, oh, should I do this? Should I do that? You might even imagine, with an internal conflict, you might even imagine like the angel on the character's shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and the angel is trying to convince the character to do the right thing, and the devil is trying to convince them to do the wrong thing. The devil is tempting, so it could be a moral dilemma. And again, it's person versus self because this is a conflict in that character's own mind. And down here, it might be an inner struggle with their own nature. And what I mean by that is a character might struggle with who they are, right? They might want to be a better person, and they're struggling with that. Let me give you an example. It might make it a little bit easier. Let's take the rainbow fish, all right? The rainbow fish, the big problem in the story, the conflict, is the rainbow fish has no friends. And he has no friends because he refuses to share with people. He's not giving, he's not generous. And so he struggles with that inside of himself, right? He feels guilty. He feels lonely. And he struggles with himself, with his character, right? With the type of person he is. So that would be an internal conflict. He's struggling with himself, with his mindset, with his attitude. So that is an internal conflict. So if that example helped you, then I would jot that down underneath your definition of person versus self. Our final example is person versus society. So, person versus society is an external conflict. So that means it's outside of the person. An internal conflict is a problem inside the character themselves. An external conflict is one outside of them. So, person versus society is a conflict between a character and larger social forces. So copy that down, hit pause if you need, and I'll explain what I mean by social forces. What I basically mean is like society. So the character might be, struggling, or they're in opposition with society, with the government, maybe with a cultural tradition or a cultural norm. Okay? So go ahead and copy this down. Okay, and again, hit pause. And again, the reason why I encourage you guys to hit pause is so that way I don't need to make these videos so long. Okay, I want to keep the videos nice and short, so if you guys hit pause, I don't have to, spend a lot of time on each slide. So let me give you an example, because again, I think it's a lot easier with examples. So person versus society. Our main character is in opposition with the government or with society. And I think a really easy example to think of would be Rosa Parks. Although Harriet Tubman's a very good example as well. So anywho, I want to first talk about Rosa Parks, and then I'll talk about Harriet Tubman, because I think she's really important too. So, Rosa Parks. I don't know if you all know this story, but I hope you do, but she was riding a bus in Alabama, Montgomery, I believe, and she refused to go to the back of the bus. Society and the government had laws, and those laws at the time were unjust, right? And they said that if you were African American and you were on a bus, you had to give up your seat to someone who was white. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Rosa Parks was an old lady. She shouldn't have to give up her seat for some, young white man. I mean, she's an old lady. The person should be kind and let her sit there. But she refused to get up out of her seat. So she was struggling with these laws, with the government's unjust laws. And honestly, let's talk about Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman did the same thing, right? She helped slaves escape to the north, using the Underground Railroad. So once again, Harriet Tubman is another example of a person who was struggling against unjust laws. Oops, I didn't mean to skip ahead. So that's what I mean when I talk about person versus society. So we have our main character, and they're in opposition to the government or to like an unjust law. And it could also be a cultural tradition, okay? There is a very famous story, which we might read this year, about young girls in, I believe it was China. I'll have to double check. But they had to, it was a cultural tradition that they would actually wear like ballerina shoes really tight on their feet. And it would actually it could damage their feet. And so there's a very famous story, I believe it's by Lawrence Yep, where the main character doesn't want to do this. So there, she would be in opposition to this cultural tradition of wearing these really tight ballerina shoes. Okay, so that's what I mean by a cultural tradition. Okay, but again, I think a really great example would be to think of, Rosa Parks refusing to obey these unjust laws. So in this case, she is working not against a person, she's working against society. Okay, she is opposing these laws, not a person. So that's why this conflict would be person versus society. I have another example. If we think about The Incredibles, do you remember how in The Incredibles, the people, they didn't want The Incredibles, they didn't want the supers to use their powers, right? This guy, he was all upset that Mr. Incredible saved his life. So the society decided they didn't want to have superheroes anymore. So they changed the rules. So in this case, The Incredibles, right, Mr. Incredible, is in conflict with society, right? I think it's America in the story, all of America chose that they didn't want to have superheroes. Okay, so again, it's more of a conflict between the protagonist, the main character, and society. It's less of a problem between two people, two characters. So, very cool. So, hopefully your notes look something like this. So we got person versus self, and person versus society. And I hope you copy down a few examples to help solidify that in your mind. Let's move on. So, due Tuesday, in your notebook, I want you to have the character, setting, and conflict of 3 unique stories, okay? And today, right now, you are in a Google form. What you are going to do is you're going to pick one of your stories. I chose this one right here. And you're actually going to plug the information of this story into the form. All right, so I'm just going to show you because it's a lot easier to just show you. So right now, you are watching this video in the Google form. So my first and last name is Joshua O'Brien. My homeroom is 7A. What up, 7A? And here's the video that we're watching. So as soon as the video is done, you're going to hit next. And over here, so you're going to pick your favorite story from the 3 that you brainstormed yesterday. And, pick the one that you think is the most fun to write. And the question is, who is your protagonist? So I'm picking my favorite story, which is the Carrot Man story. My protagonist is Carrot Man. His name is Rudy. And he's actually a detective. And how did I spell his name? Rude Vegas. I might have to double check how to spell his name because I made up the spelling. But I want you to include as many details about your protagonist as you can. Okay? So don't just say don't just say Bill. Tell me a little bit more about Bill. Okay? So for, my example, I've got Rudy. He's a detective. And, I might even say he wants to help others, right? It's very clear that he wants to help others. He's really concerned about the Zinnia sisters, Zin, Zan, and Zinea. Who is your antagonist? And include as many details as you can. So my antagonist is called Jara. He's a giant, evil green and greedy pumpkin who is stealing water and nutrients from the other vegetables. Okay, so again, plug in as many details as you can. You'll hit next. Where does the story take place? My story takes place in the garden. And when, right? Because again, setting is not just where, it's also when. And this is the peak of summer, so like September. Oh my, spelling is tough. I should capitalize my S too. Sigh. September / late August. Okay. If you had a specific year, you could put the year. Maybe if your story takes place at school, maybe you're more specific, it takes place here and here. You'll hit next. And then the last question is, what is the main conflict in your story? Okay, what is the main conflict? What's the big problem? And the big problem is the Zinnia sisters are dying of thirst. You'll actually learn this. I've continued writing this story. Other vegetables are also struggling. Jara, the evil pumpkin, is hogging all the water and nutrients. And we'll see. Will the young Rudy Rutavegas be able to solve this mystery and solve the problem? Because he's a young carrot. This is his first ever case. So I might even add that. That's part of the problem, right? This is Rudy's first case. Will he solve it? Now, what type of conflict? Is it Rudy versus himself? Is it Rudy versus an unjust law or versus the government? No, it's Rudy versus the evil pumpkin, right? So it's person versus person. So I'm all done, right? I've plugged in all of my information for my one story, all right? And again, we are going to write this story. We're going to rewrite this story. So pick something that you really want to write, okay? Don't pick something boring or you're going to be bored for several weeks, okay? When you're all done, hit submit. And I hope you guys have a fabulous, fabulous weekend. So proud of you guys. Shoot me an email if you have any questions anytime. Much love. Catch you later.